podcast, I spoke with David Cruz, also known as Zurc. He's a friend of mine. He was a classmate of mine in college. He's a linguist, an interpreter, a translator, and a photographer. Please enjoy whatever you listen to of this dialogue between us. Do you have any thoughts on specifically like men having long hair, but in America at least generally it's like women tend to have longer hair and men have shorter hair, but like that's changing culturally. I don't know. What are your thoughts around men having long hair?
Yeah, that's an interesting, actually, a cool question because I can go back to my early childhood. I always wanted, for some reason, actually, I hated to cut my hair because my hair
Okay.
grows really, really fast. So every 2 weeks, I would have to get a haircut just to keep up, since I was a little kid. So I hated it, and so I always opted for like mid mid to long hair for like a so I had also like the mushroom cut, the bowl cut, because he was
Okay.
kind of like long.
Yeah.
And so like that's where it all started. And it wasn't up until high school
Uh-huh.
that I started letting my hair grow. And in sophomore year, that's when I went through like my emo phase. So I had
Yeah. I saw that.
I had the
Hair down the
hair,
side.
yeah, yeah, to the side, my bangs basically. And then I had long hair up until junior year. I cut it for my senior year. Uh, no, I think I only had it for sophomore and a little bit of junior year. Because junior year for prom and senior year, I had short hair again. And then I didn't let it grow again up until second or third year of college. Second year of college, that's at end of second year. Then I cut it again after graduation, and then pandemic was when I started letting it grow. And coming from a Mexican family, a conservative Mexican family, having long hair, quote unquote, has always been frowned upon. But I kind
And why
of
is that? Just because it's not professional or is it?
Partly it's seen that it's a length reserved for women, so that's where a lot of part of the machismo comes in from the Mexican culture. But in a way
What
I
is
kind of didn't.
machismo? What does that mean?
Machismo is when you portray um it, it's sort of like portraying the alpha male image in the
Hmm.
culture and how they're supposed to act and how they're supposed to look. Basically being the lead of the household, and it the man has to be obeyed by the women, and they need to be catered and so on. So basically, I put it as treating the man as a king. Um, and so in a way it's very toxic because it also doesn't allow you to um, uh, grow emotionally in certain aspects, or you don't learn certain aspects of yourself to fully come out and live an authentic self, because you're always trying to portray the image of what the alpha male is.
Hmm.
Um, and so to that degree, it varies from person to person. And for me, it just part of having long hair didn't take away my manhood or my malehood, right? I didn't see it as a thing that affected my identity as a male and as a man. Um, so it was easy for me to ignore the comments of, "Oh, you should cut your hair, you look like a girl," or "Oh, cut your hair, it doesn't look nice," or it's not professional." And it's like it's really not what you think about my hair is how I feel about my hair. and
Hmm.
my hair is part of me and who I am and my identity, right? It helps for some reason. I mean, throughout history, men have had long hair. So it just never occurred to me that having long hair was a conflicting aspect of what it is to be a male and a man.
Cool. All right, nice answer. Yeah, it's almost like what I'm hearing, maybe is wrong, is like there's a particular current cultural narrative around short hair, let's say in Mexico and America and China, and maybe there's different variations culturally or from city to city or from one culture to another and one family to another, but um it's just a temporary cultural narrative, and some people choose to adopt it and to live in alignment with it, and other people choose to question it and maybe even ignore it because it's just not necessary for them as an individual. Okay.
Right.
Did you want to say anything more about that or no?
No, 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 no. Just agreeing
Okay.
with
Um,
your cluster of making it make sense for you. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you.
okay, maybe we can, because you grew up in Mexico, maybe, and it seems like based on some of your posts on social media, you have had, at least in the past, some interest in like uh past like native or indigenous like Mexica culture, or like for example the Aztec people or the Toltecs or other indigenous native Mexican people. What about is any of that still inspiring you or speaking to your heart? If so, like what about it is still fascinating to your heart and mind?
Yeah, that's actually a really great question. My dad has always, since I was a little kid, always taught us or try to teach us and remind us of like, know where your roots are, know where you're coming from. And so my dad took it upon himself to make sure that as we were growing up in Mexico, to take us to these different archaeological sites and colonial era buildings and historical and museums and so on, that the out of all that exposure, like my dad basically exposed us to the history of Mexico, the living history, the remaining living history of Mexico. And my fast and even schools would sometimes take us to Teotihuacan, right, to the pyramids, and you at that time you were able to climb up the pyramids. Not so much anymore. I don't think it's allowed anymore, but that part of history always interested me because in my head I couldn't comprehend how we were from the same land, right? The same motherland, and yet we lost that identity. And obviously, as you keep growing up, you understand what colonialism did to the nation and so on. But like when you're growing up as a little kid, you're just like, wow, like these are part this is part of the place that I grow up that I'm from, and this is part of the people who used to live here. Why is it that we don't know what this says, or like that this is limited knowledge? So from that, that's where my interest in languages came up, and history, and partly more about before colonial history, right? That the you call it in you'd call it pre-Hispanic history, meaning pre-Hispania, pre the colonization of Spain in the Americas. Um, so I became very interested in that, and also growing up, my dad would take me biking, mountain biking, and we would find sometimes arrowheads made out of obsidians. And when would go to Mexico City, you would see the rituals the cleansings from the different indigenous peoples still carrying out their dances and so on, or the ceremonies of like los voladores de Papantla, which is people on a really high post, wooden post, and they are rendering tribute to the gods, and in such a way that they descend. They're all tied up with rope that is long enough for them to, as they're spinning down and hanging upside down, it's long
Whoa.
enough for them to, yeah, it's crazy for them to safely land onto
Wow.
ground. And it's a really, those are like, it's the exposure that my dad made us had that really sparked all of this. Growing up in Mexico, it became a big interest, and when I moved here, many people didn't know about these things, and so it's sort of like, wow, like this is stuff that people don't know, and I can talk to them about, and so on. And so like it grew even stronger because people didn't even know about a lot of things that to me were like, well, those are like common knowledge because I grew up with that stuff.
Yeah.
So for people to be like, there's pyramids in Mexico in school, in middle school, and so on, and they're like, what? What is that? Um, and then in college, I became friends with a lot of people who were closer in who had a closer relationship with their ancestral roots, and they
Hmm.
were more indigenous in their heritage, and so they would sometimes invite me to um the welcoming of uh like the dances during the equinoxes and ceremonies and so on. So like I was never too far away from that aspect of my culture that to this day I enjoy learning more about it. And that's also what inspired my interest in learning other languages and in linguistics, which is where you and I met, right?
Yeah.
It was the exposure to my geographic to like the area, the geographical, to the history of the geographical area where I was born at the end of the day. So I always thank the universe that I was born in that country, because otherwise I don't think I might have had such a strong interest in the past and in other cultures had I not been exposed to to cultures like that at first hand.
Yeah. So being in close proximity to those actual real artifacts and
Yeah.
those real like sites and all of the actual architecture, etc., and tools. Um, so we maybe lost some understanding of certain language or meaning, or we lost history. So for you, trying to like hit on this nail a little bit more with a hammer, it's like, are what became important? Is it like is it you're trying to keep the baton of information and knowledge moving onwards, gathering as much information and knowledge as you can to pass onwards, so that less stuff gets lost for future generations? Is that kind of what you're the kind of importance of information and knowledge and and not losing it? Kind of, is that kind of what you're touching on?
My interest first came about, but just wanting to know. And the more that I started knowing about the culture and about languages, it became more about not just the access of information for me, but really access of information for the rest of the people and the world and future people, because I would have hated, I would have hated if maybe I would have not known, but to not have known about that past of Mexico, that
Yeah.
it had such a great history that, to us now is sort of a mystery, but that it was so advanced in such a way that we're still asking questions, and to a point where we are preserving decayed cities, right?
Mhm.
We are preserving all these regions that we could easily just be like, no, we're gonna construct over this because they serve no purpose and so on and so on. So it doesn't just captivate, the my interest. It's um it's the fact that we're still wanting to know more about such civilizations, and we live in such close proximity to descendants of those people, right? Because myself, as a mestizo, I have more so less.
What is a mestizo?
A mestizo is a combination. It's just the mixing of multiple ethnicities,
Okay.
and it's just the mixing of multiple ethnicities. Um, and so you're not, I mean, I don't know now what, or I don't know I don't know, I only know Spanish. Well, I only grew up knowing Spanish.
Mhm.
So the fact that all these languages are still alive by the descendants of these people, like we are sharing our home, right? Our country with, or they are sharing their country with descendants of invaders.
Yeah.
And yet we're still asking questions about their culture. Um,
Mhm.
so it became more about like reviving that history and making sure that, yes, we had a problematic history with who we are and with who we were, but I think we are in a good place that we could now appreciate that culture and the living people who are descendants of the original people of this continent. For it would be like a homage to their ancestors to be able to bring their culture back and coexist with modern times.
Yeah. So it's not just about you, it's about all of the benefit that we can learn from the history in in that area of Earth, and all of that was invented, all that was learned, um, all of that kind of technology, etc., and then taking that and hopefully using it to benefit future generations of all people on Earth. I have
I
a
mean,
question for you. Oh, go ahead.
just think about it. Uh,
Yeah.
what does Chinese medicine do that Western medicine doesn't? They
Yeah.
incorporate, right? They incorporate the knowledge of herbs and all that, all of their ancient medicine into modern medicine to help on the health of their population.
Yeah.
So it could just be something like that, right? You start from somewhere where they
For
were
sure.
able to preserve aspects of their ancient civilizations to where it's helping future generations and the health of the current people and so on. So it's about reviving and coexisting, right? I think it's more about that. And we can do it because, I mean, at least in some aspects, China has done it and other countries have done it. But
Yeah.
I don't, that's the first example that came to my head, the medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good example. So I got another question that's kind of on topic, and I think it's something that like a lot of people talk about. So I don't know if we need to talk about it too much, but I'm just curious to hear your perspective because you're doing interpreting work, you're doing translating, and what we're talking about right now, like lost information and knowledge from indigenous languages. Like for me, I'm interested in Buddhism a lot, and there's as Buddhism travels to different countries and cultures, it has to hop from one language to another. And a lot of teachers talk about all this stuff that gets lost or confused in translation. And then there's the other side of the coin where people are saying, like, when we lose our cultural language, as the world becomes kind of more globalized, then we're losing certain cultural artifacts or important information. So for you, as someone that's spent quite a bit of time interpreting and translating, And they like how what percentage of information gets lost or like in that kind of transference from one language to another. Like let's say if we all get to some language where the whole earth is speaking one language at point and most other languages die, like how much can we transfer most of that knowledge to that singular language on the earth, whatever that language is going to be, whether it's Spanish or it's Chinese or English or some other language? Do you or like is it just like is it inherent like in the process of translating, is there like inherently gonna be some level of information that's lost? What's your
I
perspective?
I think that it's inevitable uh to lose language or to lose information as translations and the merging of cultures happen, because you stop using certain words that had such ample meanings that could mean different things, or a very specific thing that was grouped up with another word, and now the meaning gets lost. Like, there's many nuances about language, and also in the way that you're placing it and the inflections, whether they are available in one language and not the other, and so on. So, like, I think that it's inevitable that information may get lost. But I I think that if we ever get to that point, we will have many mysteries in the universe, more so than what we have now. I
Hmm.
was recently just listening to, I can't remember what podcast was, but it was basically talking about how it was talking about the Bible, a part of the Bible where is something along the lines that it was easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
how the translation from Aramaic into Hebrew into English and so on, it they try to keep a literal meaning, because from the literal meaning, it was technically not a literal meaning. They just translated what it said, not what really meant, which at the eye of a needle was talking about how their city walls had big doors, and then they would have smaller doors for humans, and when camels would go through those regular doors, they would basically have to like dismount them, and they would have to kneel down and squeeze through them, and sometimes
Hmm.
scratching the camel and so on. So
Yeah.
it was basically talking about getting a camel through a human door, not through an actual eye of a needle. So a lot and many of those things, you wouldn't know if you didn't have someone um who was knowledgeable in all these different languages, that has read the same text in all these different languages, that can understand whether it was a literal meaning or whether it was an idiomatic meaning. And so in a translation, you're not able to see that. You just think that it's an idiom, for a modern idiom or so of some way, that, yeah, okay, an eye of a needle and a camel, I guess, is an abstract meaning. But in reality, it's easier to get a camel through a human door than through something.
Hmm.
Can't remember the verse, but um so that's the example. It's like we wouldn't know. And many things like that, they get lost in translation because the translator has to think about whether it's sort of like the interpretation of the Constitution, right? Whether they
Hmm.
are a literalist or a semanticist, or and the intended meaning or the literal meaning, a literalist, and so on. So it's sort of the same thing. And when you're talking in abstract thoughts, the translator does have to come into it. there's a conflict, and sometimes you have to choose whether you want to keep the meaning or you want to keep the literal translation.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
professionally, you're basically trying to keep the meaning, but sometimes keeping the meaning changes the words that if you translate the translation, if you translate an already translated paper and you translate that translation,
Hmm.
your third paper is gonna be, and you translate it back to the original language, the two papers in the same language will be different.
Yeah, it's like that
And
telephone game, kind of like where you keep passing the same message to the next person, and by the time it comes back to the person who started the original message, then you have a different message.
yeah,
So, yeah, kind of that child. Yeah, it's so I guess all that we can really do is try our best to preserve things and pass on meaning and information as skillfully as we can. And things will be lost and things will be relearned probably. And um, yeah. Hmm.
we are an amnesiac race.
Yeah, that's an
We have
interesting way of putting it.
such a short memory span in terms of generations. Like, I don't think we live long enough to make sure that our knowledge is permanent, such that we can only capture so much in our memories, that if we don't transcribe it into something permanent, then we forget about it. And that's the point of all these monuments and all these hieroglyphics and so on, that we want to preserve all this information, but because we live such short lives,
Hmm.
even these monuments start to lose meaning,
Totally.
which
Yeah.
is crazy. I don't know. It just
Yeah.
blows my mind.
And also, I was watching a video on your Facebook account of some indigenous people, and this little boy was like watching what appeared to be perhaps his father creating like a bow and arrow. I don't know if this was a real video or enacted, but like whether it was real or not, like it made me think about like how I'm the same like person as that little boy. And like my dad, he was doing stuff that was like that making that bow is like metaphorical for like, for example, like the handyman work that my dad does, the carpentry work that my dad does, like all that kind of stuff of like building and stuff like that's like making the bow. It's like this very practical survival kind of thing. And for me, I was distracted by skateboards and scooters and starting to get distracted by video games and uh, uh, MTV and then the internet started bombarding me and I started to go on MySpace and Facebook and YouTube. And now kids these days have like TikTok. like
Mm.
we've missed the dad making the bow, the dad making the carpentry work, the plumbing work. Like maybe at some point like the kid gets it, but like the entertainment that's being proliferated through like the capitalistic global market is like so attractive and distracting for the youth of today that they're missing I mean, they're not missing it. Like I'm making huge, vast generalizations, but at least some of the youth are missing that baton of those practical uh, things that each generation has been passing on, which is kind of analogous to the loss of language, so to speak, that we're talking to here. I don't know, but I don't know what to even say about that. But I'm just trying to find some kind of parallel to language and the loss of other things, skill
No,
sets, I guess.
I agree. I agree. In the sense that we're all trying to go into the common language, right, which is the internet, that we're missing out from our own individual learning, right? We're all trying to learn the same thing that's out in the internet, but not what's really immediately around us, right? We're not looking at the trees and the seasons. And if you have a fruit tree out there, how often it's giving you fruit, or how it's, if you water it more or less, how big the fruits are gonna come, and if you put compost around its roots and so on. Like we, and at the end of the day, then suddenly we're like, oh, I need to know this. Then you're like, man, I remember I had the opportunity to do this. So now I'm gonna have to do it through YouTube or do it through TikTok and look, okay,
Yeah.
let's see if anybody has grown a bonsai tree in the cold, or if
Yeah.
anybody has kept, I don't know, I don't know, any X topic, right? Whatever X topic. So it's it's very unfortunate, and that's also the way in which we are, in which we let this new technology into society, because had we known how we would take, I guess, technology, because it's an addiction. We're addicted to technology. I
Yeah,
think
my
that we
students that
would
have
have,
iPads in their class and their computers, it's like incredibly distracting, and it's like always this like endless dynamic of like, am I teaching you right now, or are you using
yeah,
social media right now? And like, how many times do I have to tell you this? And like, that's so much more interesting than what I have to teach the kids a lot of the time, right? Because it's just this huge portal to endless stimulation.
yeah.
And we only have like 7 minutes here, but like I'll try to say this really quickly. In China, what you'll see oftentimes is these elders, these women and older men, and they've got all these plots of lands all over China, like so many places in China, like oft even in cities where you don't have any development. There's just a plot of dirt land. The elders are going in, they're growing all these vegetables, right? And I was talking with my wife last week or so, and she was saying that like so much of the youth, they don't know how to like plow the land and grow the vegetables, and they don't know, like they don't have those green thumbs, and they don't like, they're just focused on going to the supermarkets to buy the monocropped tractor kind of farmer, like industrial farmed kind of vegetables. And I don't know if that's even bad or good, or like I don't want to think about it in like a black and white sense, but or if it's even problematic per se. But it's just it's not. It's going back to just losing skills. Sorry for interrupting you, but
No, 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 no,
I
not
couldn't
at
help
all.
myself. Yeah,
No, no, not at all. Thank you for that comment, because I mean, I do believe that it's bad, because I don't know. From what I learned in college, some of the recent, like, not being able to feed your family, especially when it's not being able to grow, learn how to, not knowing how to grow crops, especially when we are dependent on monoculture crops, is very problematic, because the second that there is some sort of disease on that plant, then poof, all crops around the world start failing, right?
mm,
And then what you're gonna do, then we're gonna have famines. And so
yeah,
we can't really risk that. And so I think it's very important for, I guess, societies as we move forward, to make sure that we are, because if we're gonna get all these type of knowledge from the internet, make sure, or from these devices, make sure that the personal time that we're spending in school, we're learning how to do that. So maybe we go back, maybe not to school to learn about trigonometry and calculus, because we have these programs on the internet. But no,
yeah,
we're gonna have a cultivating class. We're gonna have a construction class. We're gonna have, like, things that
yeah,
will
yeah.
actually help us to
Like go out
live
into a
outside.
forest, yeah, and
Yeah,
like pick
yeah,
mushrooms or something. Be able to
yeah,
identify what's edible, and yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And that's gonna save us. I'm
Interesting.
pretty sure.
And what?
And that's
Oh,
gonna save us.
yeah, and that's gonna save us. Yeah, we're kind of thinking in terms of survivalism here, and that's like, I mean, why do we have fear? Like because we want to survive, and like we want not only the information to pass on, we want the language to pass on, but we want, I don't know, most people probably,
I mean, maybe I'm making too big of a generalization, but definitely some people want humans to continue onwards. I don't know how long onwards, but like continuing language and information and skills and um, but yeah, how do we do that in the face of distraction and entertainment and the stress of trying to survive in a globalized world? I
Yeah.
don't know. There's 3 more minutes. Do you have any last things you want to say?
No, well, yeah, a couple things. I think that hopefully society wakes up and starts focusing not just on the culture of oneself, but the culture of those around us and their languages and their histories, so that we can continue growing holistically as people. And yeah, as the human race, I think, along with our planet and nature. So, thank you for having me, Jesse. It's been great seeing you. Hopefully, I get to see you again, either here in the States or me going to China and be like,
Yeah.
Jesse, I'm out here, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
nonetheless,
Yeah,
thank you for,
hopefully we get to meet each other across sooner than later.
yes,
And until then, let's stay in touch online, man. And maybe someday we
absolutely.
can. Thank you for listening to the Blue Cuboid podcast. Please have a nice day.